Good morning. Today, I get to introduce you to my friend and fellow podcaster, Erik Olsen from Holland, Michigan. Erik is self-described as a kingdom impact investment advisor, which is probably something we all need. Is it fair that we're going to talk about money today,
We
Erik?
certainly can.
Oh,
Yes.
good. And retirement income planner with Arte Wealth. Did I say that correctly? Arte
Absolutely right.
Wealth company in Holland, Michigan. Welcome, Erik. Please tell us a little bit about your family, and then we're going to get into all sorts of legacy talk.
Sure. Family now, my wife of 41 years
Wow.
coming up, Joni, our two daughters, Grace and Hope.
Hmm.
Grace is having her third child here in just about 4 weeks. So we're super excited about that. She's in Seattle. Our youngest, Hope, is a painter here in Holland, Michigan.
Fabulous. And
Yeah.
what is your background? I mean, have you always been an investment planner?
No, actually, there was a period where I was thinking I was going to be on the A team. So I'm making using that with deliberately jokingly and be a pastor or a missionary. That
Oh,
didn't play out. Went to grad school. Thought I was going to be on the B team and be a professor that would actually be in a Christian college and hopefully help in that way. Ultimately, landed in wealth management on the C team.
huh. But
But
I hope
since
people,
that time, it's I've changed my theology has shifted, so I
yeah,
see it as part of the A team.
yeah, I think, yeah, I was hoping my listeners understood your joke. Yeah, because I've had that conflict. I mean, people think because I was what you call a professional missionary, I got paid for it. In other words, I
Mhm,
had to be supported to be able to go.
mhm.
Um, I remember a friend saying when I stopped being a missionary, she goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you got married," because Mark wasn't into joining the same organization when we got married.
Yeah.
And they wanted both the husband and the wife on the team. And she goes, "I'm so sorry you got married because you always want to be missionary." I said, "You know what? People in California need Jesus too. And that's
Right.
what we need to mainly think about." So your background you thought was going to be theology and then teaching, but certainly all your training has helped you to do what you're doing to now. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's made me a different, I think, a very different, adopt a very different approach to advising.
Yeah. I probably won't understand most of the advice you give today because my husband does all the money things.
Hmm.
I was taught how to balance my checkbook years ago by my mother. And then I did it for the first month that we were married, and Mark said, let me do that for you, please.
So,
And now, of course, we don't balance. We just check our accounts every day and make sure there's enough in it. How did you get into it initially, especially as it concerns retirement and the kingdom?
mhm. There was a very serendipitous situation at a consulting firm that I was part of in the greater Chicago area. And that story is probably worth telling, but in a different setting over a beer or something like that, a glass of wine.
Okay.
But the nutshell version of that is that the um, the owner was really bored with the consulting firm that he had built, and so
Huh.
started day trading and was losing 40, 50, $60,000 a day
Oh
in
my
the
goodness.
markets. And one evening went, shut the computer off in despair that he'd lost another sizable chunk and hadn't been able to exit the position. And the next morning he found he was, to his astonishment, he was way up, not down,
Oh,
and wondered what happened. And so he said, "Erik, you're the only one with any statistical training in the group. So
wow.
would you please model this?" And I'm thinking, "You've got to be kidding! You've got to be kidding! We're trying to run a consulting firm here. Why are you going to divert my energies to this?" But in the
So
end,
was
it
this
led
his own personal resources, or was it the resources
Yeah,
of the
his
king
own. Well, yeah, it
of the
was his own. So
company?
he's the owner of an S corp, so he can do with his funds as
I
he
see.
wishes to do, I suppose. But
Huh.
it ultimately led to our essentially deciding that consulting was a fruitless activity comparatively, that we ought to pursue this high frequency trading strategy and go from there. And without leaving all of the intervening bumps in the road out of the picture here, in 2004, then I switched into being, after that period and some hedge fund experiences, switched into being a planner with a regular public investing focus. And then in 2010, switched to a firm that did a lot of what I'll call modified endowment style investing, so more private investing, and that that led into a very different chapter here these last 14 years, with a heavy emphasis now on planning for retirement income, because that stage of life oftentimes in some of the key choices that you can make there will say have a lot to do with how much you retain and how much you pay off in taxes. So by using various aspects of the tax code in a savvy way really helps you to retain more. And for believers who have a heart for generosity, whether that's generosity in the form of giving to charitable organizations, 501(c)(3)s, or generosity in the form of investing in various kingdom-oriented investments, kingdom-oriented businesses. Which, if you're interested to talk about some of those just glorious things that God is doing around the world today, I'm happy to talk about some of those. But by having less siphoned off to the IRS and more available for that sort of kingdom impact, I think that is that's a joy for me to help people with that.
Who is your typical client? Is it someone who makes a lot of money but doesn't know what to do with it? Is it someone who wants to make more money and would like to give to these kingdom organizations, or is there a typical client?
I would say there's a fairly typical client, and then there are the uncommon clients, and whom this sort of very specialized approach serves, most especially. Most of the clients are, I'll say, probably 55 to 70 when they discover us. They've built a certain portfolio of a certain magnitude, and they recognize that now tax savings for them will will have a meaningful impact. It won't just be in percentage terms; it'll be in real dollar terms. So there's a fair amount of complexity, and they want that complexity. They want help with that complexity, and they recognize that that's something that, while you might learn how to do some index fund investing on your own pretty reasonably well, learning how to then go to the next level and do tax avoidance through retirement income strategies and what have you, that's a different sort of knowledge base and skill set. So those clients tend to value what we do, but it's especially the clients that have a generosity gene that's really well developed, that especially value what we do, because our approach is really to help them think not just about the technical aspects of wealth management, but also about the theological aspects of it.
Like what?
So, well, first and foremost, ownership. So who owns what? Most people in our country today, and I'll say for that matter, most believing advisors still work from this framework as well. Is that their fundamental assumptions, while they're Christian in their general we'll
Mindset.
call it theology about, say, salvation and about sanctification and such. When it comes to thinking about wealth, it is in most cases just an uncritical adoption of the dominant secular paradigm about what wealth is.
Hmm.
And so the Bible challenges that, and starts with the viewpoint that, first of all, God owns this all. So when we say to ourselves that, well, look, I'm going to make this choice, I'm going to make that choice, I want this, I want that. What we're really, in some cases, saying is that I have been for a season in God's long eternity, and certainly in his long plan between creation and the new creation. I have for a season been entrusted with a certain share, not of my balance sheet, but instead of God's balance sheet. And then, if so, that I should be determining what to do with that on the basis of not what I, as the presumptuous, uh, you know, uh, um, counterfeit owner, think should be done with it, but I should rather be consulting the true owner of those assets to see what the true owner wants done with those
Hmm.
things.
It reminds me of me going into Home Goods and praying before I go and saying, Lord, make sure I keep my credit card in my wallet if you don't want me to spend anything here. But if there is something you do want me to steward my funds, which are yours, why waste his funds? Same thing with why waste your time. Time
Mm-hmm.
is also a huge resource that we do not
Mm-hmm.
get back. And yet it is God's time. And that doesn't mean that we never take a nap. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that we never go out to dinner with these funds that God has given us, right?
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. There's ample biblical support for the occasions where the Lord endorses and indeed even mandates that we spend money on feasting and celebration.
Right.
And in the Old Testament, it was commonly a tenth would be set aside just for those purposes of
Hmm.
the feasting and the celebration.
Huh.
So
Wow.
this is certainly a loving God who wants us to experience the blessing of his graciousness toward us, and the blessings of his provision for us. Certainly that is intended, but when it moves from celebration and a worship oriented or gratitude oriented enjoyment of God's goodness towards us, and into instead a self indulgent embezzlement of God's wealth for our own purposes, then we, I think, have can honestly say we've transgressed.
Yeah.
So
We
what
can call
I
it
think,
sin. You can call it sin if you like.
okay, we can call it
But
sin.
the fact is that it reminds me when you said that a tenth in the Old Testament was put aside for celebration, and I'd like to know where that is. Maybe you can send me that reference. But
Hmm.
I know they do celebrate a lot, and the whole thing about the temple. And I know my brother Hi, a godly man, his favorite book is Ecclesiastes, and it talks about enjoying your life and your wife,
Uh-huh.
which he does. I'm glad she's put up with him these 55 years. But when my folks passed away in the same year, within 4 months of each other, my sister-in-law, the same wife, was in charge of the trust. And without us knowing, she put aside, I think, $25,000 for all of us kids. There's five more to get together.
Mhm.
And so we have sibling reunions. And
Mhm.
by the time this is published, we will have had our fifth. And I think the money will have run out because it pays for all of our flights. It
Mhm.
pays for all the food. It pays for our enjoyment. One year we went to a car show in downtown LA just because one of my brother-in-laws is really into cars. And we thought, well, we'll have fun there. It doesn't matter where we go, just so that we're together. In fact, the
Mhm.
first year we went to Disneyland on mom and dad's dime. And because my mother loved Disneyland so much, and they would love that investment in each other and the celebration really
Mhm.
of how they raised us. Not that any of us are perfect, but we do enjoy being together at least 3 days of every 2 years. And
Mhm.
so it's been a great time of celebration. What do you view as the biggest mistake we Christians make in the area of money?
Well, let me actually then, in response to this, I'll offer a book recommendation because it also goes back to the previous question that you posed to me. And
Okay.
actually, I've got lots of book recommendations.
Maybe
So,
you could send them to me later, and I'll put them in the show notes.
all right, I will do that.
But go ahead and give me
One
this
of,
one.
in this instance, it's a book called God and Money,
Oh,
and it's by Greg Bauman and John Cortinez. And in that book, they'll address, and their subsequent book as well, which is True Riches, they address a lot of these sorts of questions. What was the Old Testament prescription for
okay.
tithing and celebration and so forth? But as to the biggest mistake that people make, I guess it will. I will say to a certain extent, it depends on if we're talking about the practical mistakes that people make, or the sort of the mistakes of the heart. But
Well, give
when
me
I think,
one of each
all right,
because
uh,
our practical mistakes often come from a poor mindset. We just haven't thought about it that way.
hmm hmm
So say whichever one you want first.
well, let me start with the one of the heart, because I think in this sense, Jesus had a lot to say about money, as we know.
Hmm.
And one of the most stinging things that he had to say about money was that you cannot worship both God and money. But Jesus uses a slightly different word than money. He uses an Aramaic word that some translations capture as mammon. And the sense of mammon is that it is more than just um, a store of value, or currency. It connotes demonic power. And
Wow.
so from that standpoint, when you think about it is really a worship question as much as it is just a practical usage question. Have I in my heart, um, do I dream about? Do I fantasize about more wealth, or what wealth will permit me to do, because wealth represents for most people a form of power. It's
Sure.
power, relational power, it's materialistic power. There's all sorts of forms of power. God wants us to have an undivided worship of
Mm.
him and undivided esteem of him. So that's the first mistake, which leads then to many, many practical mistakes.
Hmm.
But I guess if we were to identify one sort of practical mistake that I do see, it is to not. This is going to be so formulaic for a planner to say this, but it's to not plan,
Oh.
and to whether that is at a basic level, not to have any sort of sense of what your budget is, or to have
Mhm.
made sort of given intentional thought to how you'll allocate. Um, but or if it's at a larger level, when you think you don't take into consideration what sorts of steps you need to make to have sufficient resources to support yourself once you can no longer work, but then not overdoing it and essentially laying up far more than will ever be necessary because of your insecurity or your uncertainty. So planning and worship, proper right worship and good planning together, I think, go far to
Wow.
solve both the hard issues and the practical issues of wealth.
Yeah, I was complaining to my husband the other night about he invests all the time.
Mm,
He would probably be a great team member of yours. I don't
mm,
understand what he does, but I do share the account, so I see what he does.
mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm,
go, let's plan a vacation. He goes, well, we just
mm-hmm.
had one. I go, not this year. And I can argue him under the couch, so he sort of gives up. But I did say, you're um going to invest everything and then you're going to have a lot of money, but I'm going to be dead. So it's like we have to use some of it now, which I think is what you were saying. Don't over plan because of insecurity, because that means we're putting our hope in, if we think, oh, well, I'm being a good Christian because I'm planning. But if we're putting all of our eggs in that basket, literally, and saying, I now depend on my retirement versus depending on God,
Mm-hmm.
you see what I'm saying here?
I
And of
do.
course, by the next day, we had planned a Viking cruise. So I did win in that regard, but we did get a very good deal and I did help pay for it because I wanted a balcony window room. So, there are compromises that we have to make, but it was kind of funny that that just happened. Did you want to add something to that?
Oh no, I first of all, I love those stories, and I'm glad that you have that dynamic within your marriage.
I'm glad we're still
Um,
married, frankly. So that's good too. One
I think of
mistake.
it
Go ahead.
more from the planning side, though. I think of it like this way: if you've ever been to Niagara Falls,
Yeah.
okay, and so wow, the power of those rushing waters. If someone, let's say Mark, blindfolded you and then asked you to walk as close to the falls as you possibly could, but not into them, you're now blindfolded. You're doing this by sound and by feel. It's likely, wouldn't you guess, that you would stop somewhat short of the water's edge,
Yes.
just to be precaution, to exercise good precaution there. Um, but if the blindfold came off, you'd say, oh, well, first of all, the railing is another 20 feet farther than I had imagined. And there's this delightful little flat rock area that's really dry and spacious. If the rangers aren't looking, I might just take a step out onto that and go one step further. It's the same way when it comes to money, that within the absence of planning, it's like wearing a blindfold and people become more cautious than they probably need to be.
Oh.
But if they can take that blindfold off and have the closest thing to a clear view of Niagara Falls that this analogy can support, then they're in a much better position to say, all right, with that, then I'm in a position to be this much more generous, or
Mm.
I'm in a position to be investing in these dramatic dramatically high impact companies in a way, even if there's a somewhat concessionary return to those investments, it's still at a financial level a concessionary return, in many other ways a ginormous return. Now I feel like, okay, I can do that because I can see precisely how the Lord has cared for me and provided for me. It's
Mm.
clear now. I'm not wearing the blindfold any
Mhm.
longer.
That's so true. When we first got married, I did the envelope system, where you just put
Hmm.
the different envelopes, the different things that and Mark had never been married before, neither I. So he didn't know how much things cost. So he had to
Mhm.
do a lot of adjustment through the years. But I remember having the freedom because of the plan. I could spend everything in this envelope because I had taken care of everything else. So
Mhm.
that kind of it's a very simplistic way of what interpreting what you just said. Um, one mistake I think we could have one of two extremes. One is we don't think about it enough, our money and our investment or our future, or we think about it too much. How can we land a godly balance? How can we live maybe close to the edge without the blindfold?
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think um, good planning. I hope I won't sound like a broken record, but helps you calibrate that so you now it's not you're not preoccupied with the worry about wealth.
Mhm.
So you don't go to the extreme of thinking too much about it, and at the same time, it helps you to think enough about it so that you're not taking for granted, I guess, a circumstance that you may not actually be in. I do have some clients though who don't buy this whole idea this is God's and that my life is intended for his glory and for his, I'm longing for the coming of his kingdom or anything of that nature. And some of these clients have a lot of assets, far more, and they know it's far more than they ever could spend, and yet they are some of the most obsessed, money obsessed clients that you'll or people that you'll ever meet, where it will be daily and for hours reviewing their finances
Mm.
and checking every day to see what the value of their finances
Wow.
is. And
That
I
would
think
give me an ulcer
right, and think what it
because it
does.
fluctuates so much, So if you check on a bad
Hmm.
day, then you have a bad day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it is again comes back to I think strongly to the heart as to
Mm.
what it is that shapes all of those habits.
Have you been able to counsel Christians who've lost a lot of money in the stock market because of what 2008 was a bad year?
Mhm.
Other years, or times, election years can be horrible, which we are facing. So it makes me nervous when I know that my husband may have invested in something that may be at the bottom of the barrel. I just don't want to know about that. Of course, he'll just
Uh-huh.
buy more at that time.
Uh-huh.
Can you give any suggestions for those who have lost a lot of money?
Well, it's the answer to that is going to be so particular, depending
Okay,
on how
to the
much time
person.
they have for recovery
Okay.
and such. So, most of the time, I'll say, if you're young or younger, let's put that, and you have a pretty long runway where you're still going to be working for quite a number of years,
Hmm.
and it's not until much later that you're going to be relying on that those assets that you've accumulated to support and replace your paycheck. I would say, in although it's not fun to watch the decline, at the same time, a younger person almost should celebrate it
Mm.
because what that permits them to do is to have a widespread resetting of prices. And now, as they do their systematic investing program out of the surplus of their income, they're buying market, they're buying assets that are steeply discounted,
Hmm.
which in the long run, it will be the dollars that they invest after the big tumble that will do them the most good in the
Hmm.
future.
Right.
So for those clients, it's just shifting your attitude from one of I are the markets going down? Oh no, to are the markets going down? Oh
Oh,
boy.
oh boy. Here I go. How is money management another way of following Jesus?
As a profession or as an individual just being responsible as steward?
The second.
All right. Well, we are, as stewards. I think we're called to carry out the owner's instructions, and if we're lax in that responsibility, and we're really not attending to the questions of what resources has the master entrusted to me for this period of time, and how might I most effectively use them for his purposes, then in that sense we're missing an opportunity to serve well.
Hmm.
And what might motivate that? Suppose there's a certain personality traits and such that could be a portion of that. But in part, I believe that a desire for God's exaltation and His kingdom advancement is a strong incentive for us to properly map what it is that we've been entrusted with as stewards, and then use that in a responsible way.
Hmm. I know a little bit about this, not much, because my brother Hyatt, I think I've told you, he's a professional painter and
Hmm.
a professional Christian as well, you might
Hmm.
say. And so he goes to these huge fundraisers for like Bible translation or the Museum of the Bible, and he'll
Yeah.
paint live. But the
Oh,
people who come are very, very, very wealthy Christians, like
yeah.
the owner of Hobby Lobby.
Hmm.
And he'll buy Hyatt's paintings. He can afford them. But the
Hmm.
idea is that these people come because they want to give their resources to
Hmm.
something that lasts forever, which
Hmm.
is the kingdom of God. And
Hmm.
so they hobnob with these very wealthy but down-to-earth baseball players, who know Jesus, and they make so much money they can't even spend it all. And
Hmm.
yet these men and women really, really want to use it and steward it well. So it's
Hmm.
exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. So I think you've raised a really important distinction that I probably should have made earlier. The Bible is not anti-wealth.
No.
The Bible is actually pro wealth create, at least pro wealth creation. God is a creative God. I think I listened to your podcast episode with Jordan Rayner, and he
Mm.
raised the idea of what he called the first command, which others have called the cultural mandate. But in that, we were instructed to be fruitful and to multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. Wealth creation is an amazing and wonderful thing, and in itself can be a form of worship, because here we take this incredible creative imprint that the creator of the universe has placed on us, and then we deploy that creativity out into the world and make things that didn't exist before.
Mm.
That fantastic, whether that's a painter or that's an entrepreneur
Right.
or otherwise, bringing something into being that didn't previously exist is itself a God glorifying activity.
Hmm.
But it's beyond the wealth. And by the way, wealth creation is essential for there to be wealth sharing,
Hmm.
because we also
Totally.
see the Bible talk about the importance of sharing. Some people take a very strong, that's not just anti wealth hoarding. The Bible is definitely against hoarding, but some people who take it too far and go into just a general broad anti wealth mode
Hmm.
are missing the blessing element of wealth in as it cascades out into the world and out of the hands of the steward and into the hands of others.
Yeah. And like anything that is good, Satan and humans warp it. Like we depend on it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're a very famous Instagrammer and you're saying, "Well, I'm doing this for the glory of God. I'm just trying to spread my message." Or we go, "Wow, I'm pretty cool, and I have 50,000 followers." And so, and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it's probably a very slow slope
Mm-hmm.
into self-worship and really mammon, as you said. It's more demonic because, of course, that was the biggest sin was pride, and so we can easily slip into, wow, I made this much more money, therefore I'm pretty good, or I want to use it for myself. But that can be true with any blessing where we
Mm-hmm.
worship the blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's you decide to be a really great car salesman, and you say, I am such a good car salesman. And without you even realizing it, the eye is on the throne versus, God, you made me such a great car salesman. How can I use this more to glorify you? Who am I going to talk to today in the aisles of the supermarket where I work? Who am I going to affect in the neighborhood by just putting something on their front porch? It's all in the gifting by God and then recognizing they're all gifts from God. And I think it's the true with money. What legacy do you want to pass down to those who know and love you, Erik?
Probably for my children and my grandchildren. Hopefully, it is one where they love the Lord and they love truth, and and I think so far that appears to be happening with my kids who both love the Lord, and we'll see what the outcome of that is with our grandchildren. But certainly that would be it.
And how
Um,
are you making sure that legacy is passed down personally?
well, the stages that we took with our kids, of course, were just the spiritual formation throughout their lives with us at home, and then beyond as young adults, but prior to their marriages, and but even now to just gently continue to prompt them and then drop good books on them and spend time with them and. Uh, so I guess it's just that sort of that the discipleship model of just being with people and bringing attention to things of high value over
Hmm.
and over and over with the
Uh,
grandchildren. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what changes did you have to make or obstacles to overcome to help make those things happen?
In that case, I don't know that we had many obstacles. That seemed like that was fairly automatic for us just from the beginning. What I would say though is at this stage of our lives, since we're not now with children in the home and we live a couple thousand miles from our grandchildren, Joni and I are just thinking about, okay, well, what is the way in which we have a legacy that is beyond that of just our children?
Mm,
And so one of the things that I'm doing now is training young advisors who have a heart for the kingdom, or people who aren't advisors but have a heart for the kingdom, what it would be to be an advisor and to take a year of 10 to 12 hours a week exploring that and reaching a point of decision after a year of this training. Does this look like a career that you'd want to pursue?
Tell
And
me how that works, because do they have to pay you for that, or how does that work?
well, no, I'm paying them. I
Oh my
thought
goodness.
if I pay them, I can then ask them to do some projects for me. Although I
Oh,
haven't asked them to do a lot of projects for me,
wow.
but this way, because most of them are married, that way they can look their spouses in the eye and say, yes, I know I'm taking 10 or 12 hours above my full time um, vocation or occupation, I should say, and but it's not just costing you because I'm now out there having the fun of this additional learning. We're actually seeing some additional revenue come into the household. So this is hopefully, dear spouse, something that you perceive as a blessing too,
Hmm.
rather than me just out there wasting time. But
Hmm. Wow.
that approach, instead of being just focused on the usual sorts of things that advisors might focus on, which would be public investing, private investing, planning of all kinds, we're also spending time in theology of wealth, theology of missions, and those sorts of things, so that they're closer to what I would call money pastors than they are to just financial advisors.
Wow. And since your team has already started, can people have to wait a year to join your team, or can they join anytime?
No, they probably should do it on a cycle. So four of the two of the eight, which I wanted them to do, decided, you know what, I don't want to do this. That's awesome. I'm so
Mhm.
glad you decided that in less
Yeah.
than 3 years of full time work. You
Yeah.
decided that in 6 months or even less. But the six that have remained, four now have been hired, three by one firm, a fourth by another, and we'll see what happens with the last two. I
Mm.
actually no, I'll take that back. A fifth person just got hired by another firm as well. So I love this, planting seeds that will hopefully um, make their way into all sorts of other advisory firms, and hopefully the worldview and the biblical foundation of all of this, as well as what if I can, this will sound a little bit immodest, but the high attention to really sophisticated planning will permeate those firms, and then they in turn hopefully can be seed beds for more of this contagion to spread to other
Do they
Christian-driven wealth
do they
management firms.
do they have to join a Christian firm when they're completed? No.
No, I would say listen to what the Lord is calling you to do. So it
Mm.
may be that you don't want to do this at all, and you don't believe you're called to this at all. But wherever it is that you're called, hopefully you're not gonna lose this DNA that was foundational to your formation as an advisor.
Now, Eric, are you, and you can be immodest here, are you the one who created this class, this course, really?
Yeah, although I
Mm.
don't know that's I don't know if that makes me feel like I'm being immodest to say that. I think there's just not uh, there's not a great the historic path for young people or career changers to enter into this field has meant a lot of times just going out and being sellers right away.
Mm,
And I think, you know what, the body of Christ isn't just like all salespeople. The
no.
body of Christ has a lot of different giftings within it, and that's what makes the body of Christ such a beautiful thing. Wouldn't you want your firm to benefit from the people who may not be awesome at business development, but are awesome at tenderly caring for existing clients, or are awesome at analytics, or are awesome at fill in the blank. So I think we need a different model for advisor development than just sink or swim, get out there and sell, and if you fail, too bad for you. Next candidate.
Hmm.
On top of that, though, even at the Christian firms that don't go about it in quite that way, I think this isn't true of all firms, but it's true of too many Christian-led firms. There's just the Christian element of it feels to me more like a veneer than
Mm.
something that permeates all the way down to all the sorts of decisions
Well,
and
like an
advice that
add-on, you put on your
yes,
priest stole and then you become a priest. So,
yes,
but we are
right.
all priests according to scripture. How does your life personally embody God's welcome?
That's a tough question. I guess I think of myself as an introvert, and so I, in some ways, like a spreadsheet more than I like a conversation. So it doesn't have that. It's not that sort of. There's not the hospitality element to my personality. But that said, um, I think saying to these advisors, these young advisors, hey, look, there's no expectation here whatsoever that you work with in this career, let alone work with me. If 3 years in or a year in, you say, hey, you want to start your own thing, I'll give you some seed money to go start your own thing.
Wow.
If you want to join another firm, God bless you, go join that other firm. I think if all of us in the body of Christ were to take that open-handed approach toward the sort of equipping and releasing of other younger believers into the world, I think that would be a positive thing. And so, I'm hoping, at least in this case, that God, one day the Lord will look at this and say, hey, that was a fruitful way to deploy the capital I'd entrusted to you. So, and the
I
energy that I'd entrusted to you. So let's see how this goes.
I can guarantee that God is blessing this because it's not, as far as I know, there's not a lot of talk about this. There certainly wasn't when I was growing up. And
Hmm.
I think people can so easily separate the secular from the sacred. And as
Yeah.
we know from Jordan Rader's latest book, there is no separation because it's all made by God, kind of what you said earlier. Erik, this has
Mm.
been so enlightening, especially for those who understand money better than I do. And I'm going to put in show notes how people can contact you, maybe become part of your training. Sounds so wonderful and individualistic, as well as follow you on your new podcast that's coming up. Thank you so much, Erik. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Sue.